dark screen. The sound of cicadas hums in the distance. Then a woman's whisper cuts through the silence. They never found his body. Only the dolls, hanging from cypress trees. Welcome to the Deep South, where the swamps breathe secrets and the land remembers everything. Just miles apart, two worlds collide across the Mississippi River. To the west, Louisiana, where legends of swamp spirits, rougarous, and cursed bayous have haunted Cajun hearts for centuries. To the east, Mississippi, where voodoo rites, far darker than pop culture portrays, are said to echo in the pine woods, whispered by those who never leave the Delta. Both sides claim the darkness. Both swear their legends are real. But the question remains, which is more sinister? Tonight, we begin our descent, not just into the folklore of these two southern giants, but into the historical depths that gave birth to fear itself, a foggy divide. It's 3:17 a.m. in late October. A shallow fog clings to the banks of the Mississippi River, drifting like a restless soul. On one side, Vicksburg, Mississippi, with its Confederate graveyards and whispering pine forests. On the other, St. Martin Parish, Louisiana, where the swamps stretch endlessly and Spanish moss hangs like the fingers of the dead. A local folklorist, Dr. Celia Boudreau, once said, "People think the Mississippi River separates two states. They don't realize it also divides two kinds of evil." The root of Mississippi voodoo. Before we can compare horrors, we must understand their origins. Mississippi voodoo, though often confused with its Louisiana counterpart, has distinct roots. Tangled in enslaved African spiritual systems, Choctaw mysticism, and the secretive practices of Gullah communities from the Carolinas who migrated westward. By the 1830s, slaveholders in Natchez and Jackson whispered about root men, conjurers who could curse crops, turn a master blind, or make a child disappear. They weren't just healers, they were feared. Their tools? Bundles of hair, chicken bones, grave dirt, and red cloth. One journal entry from 1847, found in the attic of a plantation near Clarksdale, reads, "I found Jeremiah at the river again, speaking to no one, carving something into the trees. His eyes, they weren't his." Many believe this Jeremiah was a bywater enslaved from Benin, whose descendants still live along the Delta, practicing in silence. Louisiana's swamp legends. Meanwhile, just across the river, a different horror grew, one not rooted in urban settlements, but in the marshlands, where the land seems to breathe and time disappears. The rougarou, half wolf, half man, is Louisiana's answer to the werewolf. Legend says it hunts sinners during Lent. But older tales, whispered in Creole, suggest the rougarou doesn't just kill, it curses entire bloodlines. And that's not all. In the swamps of Terrebonne Parish, locals speak of the crocodile woman, a spirit who appears as a beautiful woman during fog, only to drag her victims underwater, where she whispers ancient French prayers before drowning them. A fisherman named Alphonse Thibodeau, interviewed in 1972, claimed, "She wore a red scarf, always red. That's how you know. If you see the scarf, run, or she'll take your soul like she took my brother." When legends cross in 1903, a bridge collapsed during a storm near Natchez, killing 17. Only one body was never recovered, that of a traveling healer named Mother Anise, known for her potions and protective charms. Locals claimed she was heading to Louisiana, chased by a secret order of preachers who accused her of devil worship. After her disappearance, identical wooden talismans began appearing along the river's edge, carved with strange symbols combining woven, voodoo sigils, and French phrases. That same year, 3 children drowned in the bayou near Lafayette, their bodies covered in claw marks and red fabric wrapped around their wrists. Coincidence? Or the collision of two dark worlds? The pop culture influence fast forward to today. In the popular TV series American Horror Story Coven, the character of Marie Laveau, portrayed as a Louisiana voodoo queen, is directly inspired by historical figures from New Orleans. But the rituals depicted? Many draw more from Mississippi voodoo, especially the use of animal blood, river stones, and pine ash. In fact, a deleted scene from the show, later leaked online, showed a map of Vicksburg with X's marking sacrifice points. In 2021, a horror video game titled Delta Hex was released, blending both legends. Players had to choose between surviving in the swamps of Louisiana or escaping a ritual in rural Mississippi. The fan base is divided to this day. Which path is more terrifying? Locals still believe we visited both sides. In Port Gibson, MS, a woman named Ms. Edna, age 83, told us, "My grandmother used to tell me, don't whistle at night. That's when the spirits are listening, especially in October, especially near the trees." In Bro Bridge, LA, we with Jean-Claude Dufresne, a bayou guide who refuses to go out during fog. I seen eyes glowing once. Thought it was a gator, but gators don't sing. She did, and my cousin ain't been the same since. The unseen divide between Mississippi and Louisiana. There is more than a river. There is an invisible boundary, one felt but never mapped. Some say it's where prayer meets curse, where old gods and new fears battle for dominion. And at the heart of it, a legend that binds both states, a floating light that travels the river on stormy nights, sometimes red, sometimes blue, always followed by silence. One boy in Greenville claimed it followed his boat for 40 minutes. He never spoke again. Have you heard of Mississippi's root doctors or the Rougarou of Louisiana? Let us know in the comments your stories, your town's legends, or tales passed down in your family. This is more than a video. It's a journey into America's haunted folklore, and you're part of it. If this story gripped you so far, subscribe. Not because we asked, but because this darkness deserves witnesses, and there's so much more to uncover. In the humid summer of 1994, a crime shook the South but barely made national headlines. It occurred in a forgotten stretch of land between Woodville, Mississippi, and St. Francisville, Louisiana, a patch of woods locals call simply the Crossroads. There's no sign there, no marker, but those who live nearby know better than to pass through it at night. A man named Sylvester Bo Kellum, age 46, was found dead in his pickup truck. His eyes had been sewn shut with coarse thread. In his lap, a bouquet of black feathers, river clay, and a single slice of lemon. No fingerprints, no blood, no motive. The autopsy claimed heart failure. But the coroner's assistant, a man named Felix Deroux, privately recorded in his journal, there were symbols under his tongue, burned into the flesh. Nothing in our books could explain them. Bo Kellum wasn't just a random victim. He was a known member of a now-defunct Pentecostal deliverance church that had launched secret crusades into nearby communities suspected of practicing witchcraft or voodoo. The group's leader, Reverend Thomas Cray, once claimed on live radio that God is calling us to burn out the roots of darkness in Mississippi and beyond. Locals whispered that Kellum had participated in something darker, an exorcism gone wrong, or perhaps the desecration of a forgotten shrine near the river bend. Just days before his death, a fisherman named Laron Banks heard drums deep in the woods around 2 a.m. It weren't music, he said. It was a warning. Felt like my bones were vibrating. Authorities wrote it off. Another small-town death. But one retired detective from Natchez, who requested anonymity, revealed that the FBI had briefly reviewed the case, not for terrorism or cult activity, but because of similar symbols found weeks earlier on the walls of an abandoned cabin near St. Martinville, Louisiana. That cabin had its own story. It belonged to a woman known only as Mother Genevieve, a reclusive herbalist who disappeared in the 1960s after being accused of kidnapping a local girl. No evidence ever surfaced. But in 1994, when investigators opened the cabin, they found jars filled with preserved toads, feathers stitched into fabric dolls, and an altar built entirely from driftwood and mirror shards. Etched into the walls in blood-like streaks were the same runes found beneath Bo Kellum's tongue. But here's where it gets stranger. The patterns bore resemblance to a hybrid of Vive symbols used in Haitian Voodoo and obscure Choctaw spirit markers documented in the 19th century. Dr. Elena Qualls, an anthropologist at Tulane University, described it as a linguistic Frankenstein, part African, part indigenous, possibly created by practitioners isolated long enough to evolve their own dialect of ritual. And that linguistic blend is precisely what makes Mississippi voodoo distinct. Unlike Louisiana's more structured and ceremonial voodoo traditions rooted in New Orleans, Mississippi voodoo has always thrived in isolation. Practitioners hid their work in cotton fields, inside churches, and beneath floorboards. Their ceremonies involved whispers, dirt, and fire, not processionals or trumpets. While Louisiana built altars, Mississippi buried theirs. One theory suggests that, after the Civil War, a group of displaced spiritualists migrated north along the Mississippi River, carrying with them broken fragments of forgotten gods. Unable to openly practice, they fused their rituals with local native practices, creating a new system meant not for public spectacle, but for quiet control. Back in the woods near the crossroads, locals say there is a tree that never dies, a gnarled cypress with 3 scars shaped like eyes. Hunters avoid it. Children dare each other to touch it. Some say it hums during storms. In 2017, a man named Darnell Rooks went missing in that area during a camping trip. When they found his gear days later, the only item missing was his voice recorder. His tent was untouched. His friends swore they heard whispering in the woods that night, a language they couldn't place. No signs of struggle, no animal prints, just a ring of burned earth surrounding the site. His mother still places candles at the river's edge every July, the month he vanished. She believes he's alive but trapped on the other side of something. While these stories seem disconnected, folklorists argue that a pattern is emerging, a kind of territorial ritual war being waged in secret between traditions long thought dead. Mississippi, with its private earthbound conjure, and Louisiana, with its swamp-born spirits and skyward curses. In 2003, a graduate student from LSU named Jordan Ramey disappeared while researching Southern death rituals. His final journal entry mentions a woman in Natchez who warned him, "Don't go looking for them. If they want to be found, they'll come to you." His car was found parked near the river. Inside, a tape recorder played a loop of drums and the sound of water lapping against wood. He has never been found. Popular media has tried to capture this eerie duality, often without understanding the true complexity. The 2005 film Eden's Cross portrayed a cursed town split by a river, where one side worshipped a sun god and the other a shadow queen. Though fictional, the film's imagery drew heavily from real voodoo iconography and interviews with residents of both states. Its most controversial scene shows a character entering a trance beside a cypress tree as whispers in 3 languages fill the soundtrack: French, Yoruba, and Choctaw. The scene was inspired, according to director Paul Lennox, by an actual recording sent to him anonymously from the Mississippi Delta. No one has been able to verify its origin. More recently, in 2020, a viral TikTok account began posting videos from an unnamed location in rural Louisiana. The clips showed artifacts left at night, bone figures, jars sealed with wax, and stones arranged in spirals. The captions only said, "The river remembers." Some believe the account belongs to a current-day practitioner. Others think it's a hoax. But in one now-deleted video, a voice can be heard whispering something unintelligible. Audio analysts later claimed the language was a hybrid Creole never before documented. This resurgence of interest has brought tourism to certain towns. Vicksburg now offers conjure tours, while St. Martin Parish runs midnight swamp boat rides themed around the Rougarou. But with tourism comes the risk of dilution. Practitioners who still hold to the old ways remain hidden, angry at being reduced to photo ops and Halloween costumes. A man we'll call Thomas, who claims to be a Mississippi root worker, agreed to speak with us anonymously. His words were chilling. "You think this is folklore? No. It's currency, power. These rituals ain't for play. They're about balance. Louisiana calls on the dead to speak. We feed the earth so the living can thrive. And when outsiders stir the dust, bad things happen." When asked about the Kellum case, he looked away and said, "That was a warning. They crossed a line. Something came back. We reached out to state officials for comment. No agency acknowledged any active investigation related to ritual activity in either state. But local law enforcement across 5 parishes and counties admitted, off the record, that they occasionally encounter scenes they cannot explain. Perfect circles of charred ground, dead animals placed in patterns, carvings on trees and symbols no one can translate. In one such case from 2011, a hunter in Wilkinson County, MS, stumbled upon a tree stump surrounded by 5 dolls made from Spanish moss and feathers, each pierced with a bone needle. At the center, a mason jar filled with river water and teeth. The site was destroyed before researchers could document it. The hunter, who returned to collect his gear the next morning, claimed all the needles were gone. The boundary between Mississippi and Louisiana may be political and geographical, but in the realm of the supernatural, it's porous. Spirits, legends, and curses do not respect state lines. And as the digital age tries to capture and commodify them, something older and far less forgiving seems to be stirring. Which brings us back to the question, which tradition is darker? Mississippi voodoo, silent, buried, controlling, or Louisiana's swamp-born spirits, loud, chaotic, vengeful? Perhaps it's not about which is darker, but what happens when both wake up at once. There is a map drawn in 1765 by a French cartographer named Émile Dufour. It was never officially published and remained hidden for over a century in the archives of a private Creole estate near Baton Rouge. The parchment is brittle, the ink faded, but one feature on it doesn't match any known geography. A river labeled La Rivière du Sifflement, the Whistling River. It snakes east to west, crossing the current Mississippi-Louisiana border, vanishing into what is now farmland and forest. No modern satellite imagery shows any such river. Yet dozens of oral histories from both sides describe a body of water that once ran cold, narrow, and fast, known not for its depth, but for the sound that echoed from it at night. Whistles with no wind, calls with no source. According to Choctaw oral tradition, the river was considered a place of crossing, not just of physical travel, but of spiritual passage. Shamans would visit it only under full moons, leaving behind offerings of cornmeal and cedar smoke. An 1811 account from a traveling Methodist preacher mentions finding strange bridges of bone near the riverbanks and hearing what he called music from the dirt. But after the Great Mississippi Flood of 1927, any trace of this waterway was seemingly wiped away, or perhaps hidden. In the decades since, strange phenomena have been reported along the suspected path of the Lost River. In 1974, 2 teenagers disappeared while exploring an abandoned church near the ghost town of Rodney, Mississippi. Their last known location was a collapsed dock once used by river merchants. A local named Ernest "Duck" Davis told the sheriff that he heard a sharp whistle just before midnight. He went to investigate but found only a circle of footprints in the mud, all leading inward. No prints coming out. In 1988, a survey team cataloging wildlife near Lake Fosse Point reported an impossible reading on their seismic equipment. Beneath the swamp floor, at a depth of 60 feet, the machines picked up rhythmic pulses, perfectly timed. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats, pause. The team dismissed it as equipment error until a night camera captured the image of a woman standing waist-deep in the swamp, head tilted back as if in song, though no sound could be heard. The figure vanished in the next frame. These are not isolated events. As the 21st century progressed, a string of disappearances began to align almost exactly with the arc of Dufour's vanished river. Between 2004 and 2021, at least 13 people have gone missing along a corridor stretching from the Homachito National Forest in Mississippi to the Atchafalaya Basin in Louisiana. While no official connection has been made, a growing number of amateur investigators have dubbed the area the Sifflement Path. In one particularly chilling case, a high school teacher named Rebecca Hollins vanished while hiking alone in Concordia Parish in 2012. Her last message, sent via satellite phone, was a recording. It contained no words, just the sound of soft whistling and what seemed like footsteps circling her. Her body was never found. Her backpack turned up days later, dry and spotless, hanging from a tree branch 12 feet off the ground. The path these disappearances follow cuts through old territories once inhabited by enslaved African communities and indigenous tribes forcibly relocated in the 1800s. Several folklorists argue that the river may have served as both boundary and conduit between spiritual domains, one that, when disturbed or forgotten, begins to reclaim what was once sacred. In support of this theory, a series of artifacts discovered in 2009 during construction outside St. Francisville revealed a startling blend of cultural elements. Unearthed beneath the foundation of a ruined cabin were dozens of small objects: copper amulets, clay effigies of animals with 2 heads, beads etched with Yoruba symbols, and scrolls written in a coded form of French Creole mixed with Choctaw. These objects suggested not a singular ritual practice but a fusion, a convergence of spiritual languages, likely born of survival and secrecy. Dr. Lionel Ames, a historical linguist, analyzed the symbols and claimed that they represented an attempt to bind two traditions, earth-based conjure and water-based invocation. One scroll contained a warning that loosely translated to, "Speak not the name where water forgets." This fragment became the obsession of independent researcher Camille Stokes, who believes that the Whistling River was once a spiritual artery between Voodoo communities on both sides of the border, used not for transportation, but for sending messages, dreams, and even curses. Stokes compiled a map using historical weather patterns, migration routes, and soil conductivity reports. Her conclusion: the river isn't gone, it's buried. Its spiritual presence remains, operating like a current beneath the earth, reacting when disturbed. In 2015, a private film crew attempting to shoot a paranormal documentary near the supposed center of the river's path encountered something they could not explain. Their footage, later leaked online, shows a fog descending abruptly, despite clear conditions. The temperature drops 10 degrees in under a minute. Static overtakes the microphones, and one crew member begins mumbling in what linguists believe is a rare French-African dialect, not spoken for over a century. The production was halted. One of the crew later claimed he woke up days later in a motel 40 miles from the site, with no memory of how he got there. As awareness of the phenomenon grew, online forums began to gather testimonies from locals. One woman from Natchez wrote of finding her daughter speaking to the Light Lady in the mirror every night. Another man from Lafayette swore that every time it rained, he heard drumming from the ground. While many dismissed these stories as folklore or mental illness, others noted a disturbing pattern. Those who reported these experiences often suffered from sudden illnesses, sleepwalking, or memory loss. It's easy to attribute all this to superstition, mass hysteria, or coincidence. But something persists, a thread of familiarity. The way the whistle is always described the same. Not high-pitched, not a melody, just a tone that seems to come from inside the listener's own chest, as if the river doesn't flow through the land anymore, but through people. A particularly disturbing account came from a priest in Tensas Parish, who claims a woman came to confession in 2018 with a story that chilled him. She said her grandmother was part of a secret order, women known as the Daughters of Sifflement, tasked with keeping the river's memory alive through ritual. Once a year, they would meet near the ruins of an old sugar mill, carrying jars of honey, salt, and pieces of iron. There, they would pour water into a stone basin and sing in 3 languages, inviting the spirits to remember the way. The woman claimed she stopped participating after a new leader took over the rites and began demanding sacrifices. First animals, then something else. When asked for details, she broke down and fled the church. While no formal group by that name has been documented, the idea of hidden societies guarding sacred knowledge is not new. In Louisiana alone, dozens of oral traditions speak of the keepers, people who maintain the balance between the dead and the living, the land and the unseen. If this is true, then the vanishings, the symbols, the whispers, they may not be random. They may be the result of broken stewardship, of oaths abandoned. And yet, the influence of this forgotten river still finds its way into the present. In 2022, a short horror film titled Beneath the Cypress won acclaim for its portrayal of a woman haunted by water that follows her from state to state. The film's inspiration? A journal from 1912, found in a flooded basement, describing a woman cursed to walk the land until she returned the river to memory. In music, several Delta blues songs refer to the singing ditch, the hollow water, or the lady's path, coded references perhaps to the Whistling River. One song by Skip James contains the line, "She went walking where the water don't run, and the mud called her name." And yet, despite the growing body of stories, songs, and symbols, the mainstream remains largely unaware. The line between myth and reality continues to blur. The river may be forgotten by maps, but not by the land. Not by the people who still leave offerings at the base of trees, who still mark the new moon with silence, who still look twice when they hear a whistle at night. By the end of the month, dozens of copycat accounts appeared, mimicking the imagery, the cadence, even the symbols. Vive-like designs scratched into tree bark, dolls made of moss and wire, jars buried in the ground. But what began as digital aesthetic quickly took on a life of its own. Viewers began reporting strange experiences after attempting the rituals shown in the videos. dreams of being underwater, hearing voices calling their names at night, pets refusing to enter certain rooms. Some dismissed it as mass suggestion, others saw something more. Among these voices was a young woman from Pascagoula, Mississippi, who used the alias River Mask in her posts. Her content stood out not for its drama, but for its accuracy. She spoke in soft tones, quoting obscure texts and using Creole words rarely heard outside of oral tradition. She claimed to be the granddaughter of a root worker who had fled upriver during the 1960s and left her with notebooks filled with spells, chants, and river maps. One video shows her standing beneath a dead willow, holding a book bound in waxed leather. She reads aloud a passage in a blend of English, French, and a third language unknown to most. Her voice shakes as wind cuts through the trees, though the air appears still. The comments were instant. Some called it performance. Others swore they saw figures moving in the background. As these videos circulated, they reached unexpected places. Cultural scholars began analyzing them for traces of authentic tradition. Linguists noted the resurgence of dead dialects, reanimated through digital mimicry. But the practitioners themselves claimed they weren't reviving anything. They were simply remembering, not learning, but reconnecting. One user posted a video titled, "I didn't know I knew this," describing how they instinctively buried a jar of ash and salt during a thunderstorm without knowing why. It was only later, after messaging others in the community, that they learned this was part of an ancestral rite meant to appease earthbound spirits. This idea that cultural memory is encoded in blood, waiting to be reawakened, became central to what some are now calling the Delta Revival. It's not a movement in the traditional sense. There is no leader, no headquarters, no manifesto. It's a current, a drift of voices and visions spreading across digital channels, whispered through screens and stitched into duets. But while many celebrate the revival of forgotten practices, others fear the consequences. In June 2021, 3 teenagers from East Feliciana Parish went missing after attempting to replicate a ritual shown on TikTok. The video they posted beforehand was meant to be ironic. They laughed as they scattered feathers and wine near an abandoned train bridge, then played an audio loop of whistling and drums. It ends with static. Their phones were found near the site, still recording. In the background of one clip, a deep hum can be heard rising steadily. Search teams found no trace of them, but a burnt ring of ground, 8 feet in diameter, remained at the scene. The incident was covered briefly by local news, but the story vanished within days. Online, however, it sparked renewed debate. Critics accused the Delta Revival community of glorifying danger, of summoning forces they didn't understand. Defenders argued that such outcomes were the result of disrespect, rituals taken out of context, performed without grounding, without preparation. A warning echoed across forums. The river gives and the river takes. Simultaneously, artists began incorporating Delta imagery into their work. A Louisiana rapper released an EP titled Swamp Tongue, featuring tracks layered with field recordings of frogs, bells, and distorted whispers. The cover art depicted a figure half submerged in water, eyes glowing beneath the surface. Fashion designers launched lines inspired by conjure aesthetics. Earthy tones, bone pendants, hand-stitched patterns meant to mimic protective sigils. Even Netflix announced development of a thriller series called Hollow Root, set along the Mississippi-Louisiana border, following a journalist investigating a string of supernatural crimes linked to voodoo traditions. But with visibility came exploitation. Pop-up voodoo experiences emerged in tourist towns. Weekend retreats promised spiritual awakenings in luxury cabins, offering sanitized versions of rituals stripped of history. Real practitioners responded with silence or subtle resistance, choosing to pull back from public spaces, reverting to the secrecy their ancestors once relied upon. A well-known root worker from Monroe posted a single sentence on his locked account: "When the eyes come, close the doors." Still, the Delta Revival continues. Young people gather not in churches or temples, but in parking lots and forests, guided by voices passed down through dreams or found in the margins of books long discarded. Some believe they are the reincarnation of those who walked the lost river. Others think the land itself is speaking through them, using new tools to echo old songs. One such song surfaced in 2023, shared by a user named Ashmouth. It's a short recording, less than 30 seconds, of a melody hummed in darkness. The sound is grainy, low, almost tender. Musicologists attempted to trace its origins, but could find no match in any archive. Then, an elder from Jefferson County, age 91, heard it and claimed his grandmother used to hum that same tune while covering mirrors during storms. He never knew what it meant, only that it was for protection. This kind of rediscovery raises a central question. Are these echoes accidents of culture, or is something older actively trying to be remembered? And if the latter, why now? What has changed? One theory posits that the river itself, whether spiritual or physical, is becoming active again. Environmental scientists have noted subtle shifts in water flow across areas once believed to house the buried riverbed. Seismic anomalies, unexplained sinkholes, and magnetic interference have all been reported within the corridor mapped by Camille Stokes. While no definitive link has been established, researchers have begun quietly comparing these readings with oral histories and ritual patterns. Even the weather appears to echo something deeper. Unseasonal storms, sudden fog banks, and unnatural stillness have plagued towns along the border. One farmer described his fields falling silent for an entire day. No birds, no insects, just the wind moving in circles. Meanwhile, the digital rituals evolve. TikTok trends now include veil days, where users dress in white, avoid mirrors, and remain silent for 24 hours, claiming it thins the boundary between realms. Others post salt lines at their doorways, reporting that it prevents shadow figures from entering their dreams. A growing number of creators are now pairing ancestral research with ritual practice, using DNA tests to trace their lineage, then aligning their conjure work with regions their families once inhabited. This fusion of science and spirit has opened new paths, but also stirred new fears. As one historian put it, the problem with resurrecting forgotten gods is that they often return hungry. There is also a growing awareness among practitioners that they are not alone. Several have begun reporting shared dreams, vivid, consistent, and collective. The most common image is of a woman standing at a water's edge, holding a lantern made of bone. She speaks no words, but gestures toward the horizon where the river bends into blackness. These dreams often come after ritual attempts or on nights of strong rain. Some believe she is the spirit of the river itself. Others say she is one of the old guardians, come to test those who dare recall the power that once ruled the Delta. We spoke to a college student in Baton Rouge who claimed to have had the dream 3 nights in a row. On the 4th night, he awoke with mud on his feet. He lived on the 10th floor of a building with no soil nearby. The lines between tradition, performance, and invocation have never been more blurred. As more people tap into ancestral channels through digital means, the question arises, are they rediscovering heritage or opening doors once deliberately sealed? At the center of all this remains the same silent divide, the old river, lost to maps, but not to memory. A current that may have been waiting all along for this precise moment, when memory, technology, and ritual collide. Before we move on to the next chapter, tell me, what part of this story has impressed you most so far? Have you ever heard any of these legends? Have you ever felt like a place was trying to tell you something, even in silence? There's a stretch of the Mississippi-Louisiana border where the map seems to falter. Small roads disappear into dense woods, isolated houses appear unregistered in official records, and road signs are upside down or covered in rust. It's there, in the quiet stretch between Wilkinson County and West Feliciana Parish, that ancient rumors speak of a town that ceased to exist, not because it was destroyed, but because it chose to forget itself. The city's name is disputed. Some call it Eloria, others Saint Mariette, and still others swear the original name was simply Now, a settlement founded in the early 19th century by former slaves fleeing neighboring states, displaced natives, and French colonists seeking refuge from war. It was a rare example of forced coexistence between cultures that, out of necessity, invented a new language, their own system of symbols, rituals, and routines. Fragmented documents indicate that the town prospered for about 50 years. Accounts suggest an economy based on the harvesting of medicinal herbs and ritual artifacts. A notebook found at an antiques fair in Jackson, dated 1852, mentions cedar blood harvests and nights of singing by the bones. It is unclear whether these are metaphors or actual practices. What is known is that around 1904, Eloria disappeared. There was no war, no fire, no natural disaster. It simply stopped appearing on maps. Families who lived just a few miles away claimed that one day there were simply no more roads leading there. Those who tried to find it returned confused, claiming they had been lost for hours, even with the sun shining brightly. One man even claimed he heard his own name being called through the trees in the voice of his dead father. In 1967, a group of oral history students from Southern University attempted to locate Eloria using testimonies from elderly people who claimed to have lived there as children. During the expedition, 3 of them disappeared for 48 hours. When they returned, they were dehydrated, their feet covered in black mud, and they refused to talk about what they had seen. One of them, years later, revealed in a never-sent letter that they had found something like a ghost town with houses made of clay and bones and statues turned to the ground. There, no one looks at the sky, as if the sky had been forgotten. This letter was used as the basis for a 1983 study that proposed the existence of ritual erasure communities, groups that, rather than preserving the memory of their ancestors, actively sought oblivion as a form of spiritual protection. The hypothesis is controversial.